Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello and welcome to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions in life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Aditi Kutty. Let's get on with the show. Welcome to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. I'm your host, Aditi Kutty, and today I am joined by Dr. Jennifer Gunsaullus, sociologist specializing in sex and intimacy, specifically in women, and also author of From Madness to Mindfulness, Reinventing Sex for Women. Dr. Jen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. I can't wait to see what we're going to dive into here.
Oh, me too. I'm really, really excited about this topic. But before we dive into it, could you just tell us a little more about what you do?
Yeah. So, like you said, so my PhD is in sociology, and I specialized in studying relationships, sexual health education, communication, marriages, and sex. And but I've been out of academia for a long time now, and what I've created for myself is I have a private practice where I help individuals and couples around all of these topics, including body image and gender role socialization. And my real passion is traveling and public speaking and talking to audience of all different ages about these topics and different aspects of these topics. And you mentioned my book. I have a couple podcasts myself. I've had, a video series. Just big picture around trying to shift our social norms and communication around sex and emotional intimacy, because most societies carry a lot of baggage around these topics, and they're taboo to talk about in an open way. And so at the core of all my work, whether I'm working with an individual or college students or CEOs and their partners for a Valentine's event, there's four main factors that underlie all my work, and that's mindfulness, compassion, vulnerability, and authenticity. And I integrate that into all of my work because I think those are a balance of those four factors are really important for most of us to be able to experience the type of intimacy with ourselves and intimacy with others that we most want.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like it's very rare to find a person who is comfortable with the idea of sex and at peace with it. I feel like it's something
Yeah.
that as people we deal with, we are uncomfortable with. Speaking of which, if you are uncomfortable with today's topic, because we
Oh.
are going to be going into explicit themes, maybe check out another episode instead.
Or stick around because I'm going to talk about mindfulness and applied mindfulness and how to learn to have greater comfort with discomfort that we have around these topics. Because when, we avoid them or we're afraid of them or we've inherited that from society or we've had bad experiences, that then has power over us, and we can learn over time how to stay present with uncomfortable sensations and actually build resilience that way. So
Yeah,
I'm
for
going to
sure.
say the opposite.
I think
Stick
there's
around.
definitely worth in sticking around. I do agree with you, but perhaps
No, I
maybe
know what
wait.
you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, for some people, they might have to wait till they're ready to tackle
Yeah.
this one.
Yeah.
So
Or listen to
yeah,
it in little bits. Yeah. Or listen to it with a friend and then discuss it. Stop it and discuss along the way. That's a
a little
really great way
podcast
to.
club.
Yeah. Oh, I love
That'd
that.
be cute. All right. So before we kind of dive into the main topic of today, which is about emotional intimacy and sexual intimacy and the link between the two, we have a segment called Have You Met Dr. Jen, in which I ask you a bunch of questions about yourself, and you just have to
Okay.
very quickly answer them. You don't need to think too hard on them.
Yes. Okay.
Are you ready?
So this is all about me. I am answering
Yes.
about me. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. What is your favorite book?
um My what can I say? My book?
Yeah, sure. We've had
No,
that
I don't.
before.
Honestly, recently I've been into like reading summer romance chick lit books that all take place in like Nantucket. So those are my favorite books right now.
Chicklet is not, it's not my thing, but I understand how healing it can be. Sometimes you just need to
Yeah.
like
Well,
escape.
and they're always about like strong female characters with, good jobs but they're trying to find their love life. I may resonate with me a little bit. So,
Tell us,
okay.
now I need to ask, what is happening with your love life?
Well, it's funny you ask because I literally just released a new podcast called Trying to Feel Sexy Again at 48,
Right,
and
right,
which I'm actually 49 now, but a year ago I ended up putting myself through this kind of spontaneous 7-day sexual energy challenge because I was
right.
single and it was still pandemic times and I was feeling
Yeah,
so not sexy. And I'm,
yeah.
at 48, I live in a really young and beautiful beach town in San
Mm,
Diego. And so it's like most
mhm.
people are like 25 and it's year round. People are on
Oh
the
no,
beach. And
yeah.
so like it just, definitely was doing a number on my mojo. So yeah, so I put myself through this challenge and then I chronicled all of it. And then I've just turned it into a storytelling podcast right now. So folks can learn a lot more than they ever need to know about me if they want to listen to trying to feel sexy again at 48. So,
Well, if
yeah.
you really want to get to know Dr. Jen, you can
Yeah, exactly.
listen to the
Exactly.
podcast. But I might just move on to your favorite
Yes.
movie.
Favorite movie. Well, I'm going old school. Like my favorite movie when I was a kid was The Sound of Music. I
Oh,
loved that and
yeah.
singing to it. And my sister and I had a little Mickey Mouse record player, and we would listen to the record on that and just sing the songs all the time. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's my favorite musical too. I grew up with that. My mom used to sing me the songs all the time.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
What about your favorite podcast?
Oh my gosh. I listen to a lot of podcasts.
Mhm,
I'd have to say The Daily by the New York Times. That
mhm,
really got me through COVID times. There's a great one called Huberman Lab. He's a
mhm,
Stanford researcher, and it's so interesting about all the latest research on sleep and hormones and attraction and exercise and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, I kind of nerd out at that one. Um, I could keep listing them, but I'll stop there.
two very good ones. Do you
Yeah.
have a famous role model that you look up to?
Ooh. Uh, Hmm, this was I don't feel like I have anybody current that comes to mind, but in the
Mhm,
past,
mhm.
I was really involved with, and I don't know if your listeners will know, but the Vagina Monologues used to be a traveling play. Okay, a lot of folks like in the United States at this point, if folks are like under 25 or something, a lot of them have never heard of it at this point.
Mhm,
So, but I was super involved with that, acting in it and directing it at various different like nonprofits and universities. But the creator of that, Eve Ensler, and she started the playwright. She wrote that play as a way of talking about what we're not talking about women's sexuality and looking at the pain and the exploitation, but also looking at pleasure and fun. And so, and then she was just out in the world doing a lot of work with women in lower income countries and women in countries where women are really oppressed and war
mhm,
torn,
mhm,
and just really walking the talk. So I think that's somebody that's been out there, just has done so much fundraising and so much good around these topics over the years.
mhm. Yeah, definitely. I think that's a pretty that's a pretty solid one, especially for the topic I guess we're covering
Yeah,
today. So definitely
yeah,
someone to
yeah.
look into. What's the last course you completed?
Uh, well, I'm going to put this in the category of course. It's a book I read and I taught it to myself, stand up comedy. Because I wanted to learn like comedy writing. And then I read this whole
Right.
book and I did all the activities. And it was really hard, but it's like really fun. I was like, I totally want to
Yeah.
do that now. I feel like I just signed up for a course, but I haven't taken it yet. So
Right.
that's why I can't answer that question. It's been a
Right.
little while since I've done another one. So I'll
Right.
go with
Yeah.
book.
Stand-up comedy course. Got it.
Yeah.
All right. That ends our segment. We have gotten to know you. Of course, you can get to know you better by listening to your podcast. But for now, this horse suffers. We might move on, I guess, to our interview segment where we talk a bit more about emotional intimacy, which is our topic for today.
Yeah.
But I guess starting right at the very beginning, what is a relationship? How would you define or describe a relationship?
I mean, like big picture relationship between
Mm,
any folks would just be a connection between two people. That's more than just passing on the street, like some sort of connection.
mhm,
And then if it's a like a romantic relationship or something seriously, then that would be more like somebody that you have a physical, a mental, an emotional, deeper
mhm,
connection with than you
mhm.
do with other folks. So, and obviously there's some, variety within that, but in general, that's how I would define relationship.
Right, right. In your opinion, does a romantic relationship still hold the same structure now that it did maybe a few decades ago?
Mm, such a good question. I love that as a
Mm,
sociologist too, because we're continuing to see, in the past, I mean, I could say in the United States in the past 100 years, 100 more like 120 years, 140
mhm,
years, like we've seen massive shifts in that relationships didn't used to be so based on romance.
mm,
They were based on economics and practicality and having
mhm,
families and supporting all of yourselves. And so I think it was really more in like the 1920s or so, so probably about 100 years ago, that we started getting introduced to a much more romantic version of
mhm,
sex. And then what we've had in the past, I'd say several decades, is this idea that you're supposed to find a partner. They're supposed to be your soulmate. They're supposed to complete you in all aspects. They're supposed to be your best friend. You're
yeah,
supposed to love them. They're supposed to be able to read your mind.
yeah,
They should be the parent, the co-parent of your children. You should die old together, and the sex should be amazing, and passion should stay there the entire time.
yeah.
And you should share hobbies with them also, like pretty much everything. That's pretty much impossible. And that's a lot
Yeah.
of pressure to put on
Mhm,
a relationship and to put on another human being.
mhm,
So, yeah, they're definitely, you were saying, does it have the same meaning, structure, and importance? I mean, as humans, we're innately social creatures. And one of
mhm,
the most amazing ways to be social with another human being is to be in a vulnerable, committed relationship with them.
yeah, yeah,
So that has it that we've had that for a long time. It feels really good, and for somebody to have your back, or somebody to
yeah,
grow old with, or
yeah,
somebody to raise children with. So, I think some of the fundamental aspects are the same, but otherwise, like it's changed massively. Also,
mhm,
because we have polyamory and open relationships and
yeah,
polypods and just our structure of relationships. Not that that didn't exist, but it's become much more popular and
mhm,
more mainstream, especially with younger generations.
mhm.
So, great question.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've moved away from heteronormativity, sorry, quite a bit as well. I
Yeah,
think people are a lot more open to viewing relationships outside of that lens.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That is, yeah. It's not this male, female, strict, and right, and that you only have sex with marriage and you get married to have
Mhm.
kids, and all of that rigidness and that structure. We have so much flexibility. Now, certainly depends on what country you're in, or even what part
Yeah.
of what country that you're in. But certainly, like a place where I live, like in Southern California, there's a whole lot more flexibility around
Mhm.
gender, sexuality, and relationship type and structure.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so within relationships, how would you define emotional intimacy?
Mm. Well, I like, like when I'm giving a talk and I talk about intimacy, I like to break it down into me, you see.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so that is because I think a lot of people, when they hear the word intimacy, they may default to be like, oh, that means sex.
Yeah.
And when I use intimacy, I mean it in a big picture way, and
Mhm,
emotional intimacy is a part of that. So to me, emotional intimacy is it's about being raw and real and
mhm,
vulnerable and allowing taking your walls down. We all
mhm.
have walls of protection and facade up because we've been hurt or we're afraid of being judged. We have been judged. We're
Yeah.
afraid of messing somebody up. We're afraid of being rejected.
Yeah.
And so to me, at the heart of emotional intimacy is letting those walls down. And it's scary. It's like really scary. And creating a safe space for someone else to do that as well, and being able to create that space for each other. And it's like the scariest thing, but it's like one of the most beautiful things.
Mm.
And when we're willing and able to be vulnerable with each other like that, like we we feel closer, we trust them more, we feel more connected. And I think often we feel more confident and stronger because we're like, wow, somebody saw me in all my messiness, and they
Yeah.
still like me, and they still
Yeah.
choose me. It's
For
amazing.
sure. For
Yeah, but
sure.
scary.
Yeah. Like I feel like we're so uncomfortable with ourselves. So to have someone else see all of who you are and then like be
Hmm.
okay with it is
I
so
know.
validating.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing. It feels really good. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess how do you feel emotional intimacy affects a relationship?
Well, I mean, it's almost endless in what it could do. So
Yeah.
if you have emotional intimacy or you have the lack of emotional intimacy,
Hmm.
I've seen couples over the years that they get together and neither of them are comfortable being vulnerable. And or maybe they grew up in households where their parents, they had very stoic parents,
Hmm.
or emotionally distant parents,
Hmm.
and then that's how they knew to be. And then they found a partner who then didn't challenge that and didn't make them feel uncomfortable. But often, especially in today's society, often at some point down the road, something's going to blow that up.
Yeah.
And that somebody's going to cheat, or somebody's going to be like, oh, I'm done here. I don't even love you. Or like the kids are out of the house and why are we doing this? And so, because there isn't those ongoing conversations. So I think,
Hmm.
emotional intimacy is hard. But you know where you stand, you know where your partner stands, and you're like a team
Yeah.
in that way, working together, and then being like, hey, this isn't really working for me. Like, what can we do? How can we work together to shift this, to grow,
Hmm.
to learn something new? Or when we're having conversations like this, I notice I'm really triggered and I want to stop doing that. But can you bring it up this way instead? And then I'm going to
Yeah.
hang in there and do my best to stay in this. All of that is just like raw, messy, honest,
Mhm.
emotional communication. But and I think a key part of it is owning it. Like we need to own,
Mhm.
instead of like projecting it on someone else or blaming someone else, or just being like, hey, this is what's showing up for me. And
Yeah.
so, there's couples that could be discussing emotions a lot or displaying emotions a lot, but I don't know that I'd call that emotional intimacy, because they're not being responsible with it,
Yeah, for
and they're
sure.
not creating the safe space for their partner
Mhm.
to really show up and let their walls down.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned earlier, like we often expect our romantic partners to read our minds. But
Right.
would you kind of
Yeah.
say that emotional intimacy is getting rid of that notion that they can read our minds and like
Mm,
telling them
that's
about
good. I
ourselves?
mean, I would call that emotional maturity,
Okay.
for
Okay.
sure. Well, the funny thing is, right, the more we practice knowing ourselves and articulating what's going on for us,
Mhm.
and being responsible with that, and then allowing our partners to do the same, we get more attuned to ourselves, and we actually get more attuned to our partners.
Yeah.
So it almost does help you read their mind more, although you're not reading their mind, but you could tell something's off. You could
Yeah.
be like, hey, like what? Like, because I know when I talk to couples and I'm helping them with their sex lives,
Mhm.
they'll be like, yeah, like, a boyfriend, and I can think of this one example. He was like, yeah, we like shift positions and I did something. And then like she just felt stiff and like the energy shifted. He goes, so I just stopped. And I said, hey, what's going on? Like, are you okay? And she goes, yeah, I got caught in my head and you moved me in this position. I was just wondering what my body was going to look like, and she got all in her head about body image stuff. And
Yeah.
but that the fact that they were able to talk about it and be vulnerable together, kept them connected in intimacy, and gave
Mhm.
them an emotional intimacy there. So it all feeds itself, and it does. We do become more attuned, but we
Mhm.
have to know we can't always know what's behind it, right? We can't
Mm.
actually read their mind. Like you can notice subtle differences, and I think that's super valuable to point out and let your partner know, like, hey, I'm with you. Like I don't know what's going on
Mhm.
here, but I know something's going on, and then giving your partner the space to share what's going on for them.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Um, I guess now you also specialize in sexual intimacy. So what does
Hmm.
that look like in a relationship? How would you define a sexually intimate relationship?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like the piece of what we're talking about here of this version of intimacy, but bringing it to specific physical and sexual interactions and arousal and desire and pleasure and orgasm and play, and and whatever you want to bring into your sexual encounter. So it's bringing this level of rawness, openness, vulnerability, authenticity, um, intentionally bringing that to a sexual encounter with your partner. And or if you do notice that you feel disconnected, like maybe stopping things or talking about it afterwards and be like, hey, can we talk about this? So maybe in the moment you feel like you just kind of shut down or you detach or something. But then afterwards being like, hey, you didn't do anything wrong, but I noticed this is what's going on for me. Can we talk about this?
Right.
That would
Yeah.
be, a way of, because it's hard. Oh, it's hard to talk about this stuff in the moment. And it's hard to do it well in the moment, because we don't want to shame our partners either, because most of us have experienced some sort of shame with our bodies or in a sexual encounter. And so when we're practicing being emotionally vulnerable in that way and just saying what we want to say, um, it doesn't always come out great in a way that's not maybe hurtful to our partners. So maybe that's not the exact right moment. So maybe you bring it up another time and you can be mindful and kind, in the way that you're discussing what was going on.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
yeah.
Now, I guess one of the questions on my list is, what is the difference between the two, and is one more important than the other? But it seems
Mm.
like they're kind of the same. It seems like they're not that different. It's just that sexual intimacy
Yeah.
is
I
like
mean,
a form of
well,
emotional intimacy.
so yeah, that's a good, interesting question. So like when I use the term intimacy, I generally mean, like, I talk about it in a big picture. So I talk about
Mhm.
physical intimacy, emotional intimacy, mental intimacy, social intimacy, and potentially spiritual intimacy. So this very
Mhm.
holistic thing. The underlying it all is this raw, vulnerable authenticity and showing up in that way. Depending on what you're talking about, whether you're sharing ideas or political views or spiritual beliefs or, meditating together
Yeah.
or, having oral sex, all of the
Mhm.
things. So it
Mhm.
is about being present and real and connecting from that place.
Yeah.
And then, when you have the sexual piece, it's just laden with so much more fear of judgment and stigma and shame and embarrassment, and our bodies make weird noises and we're afraid we're not going to perform well enough,
Yeah.
am I taking too long, or what's my body look like at this angle? So, there's just so much more on top of it.
Mhm.
And so, sexual intimacy has a whole nother depth to it, to stay open in this way, and to
Mhm.
be cultivating the emotional intimacy part of it as well.
Mhm. What, in your experience, have been the issues people have had in getting intimate? You touched on it a little in that,
Yeah.
their parents might have just been
Yep.
that way. But
So some of it, yeah. So some of it is personality. We all have genetic personality differences to some extent that we're
Mhm,
born with. So it could be some of that. It's what was modeled for us as kids growing up.
mhm,
Like I mentioned before, very, some cultures are much more emotionally stoic. Some folks are just emotionally distant. Um, how safe you felt in your household. Did you grow up with an alcoholic parent? And then we're
right.
sort of walking on eggshells. That can cause a lot of anxiety. Sometimes if you had parents with a mental illness and that you were then kind of had to be the adult and taking care of them, all of
Mhm,
these things, and then early experiences, that you had in dating and relationships, what you were taught about sex or not taught
mhm,
about it, how much
mhm,
shame you were taught about it, how you feel about your body. I mean, it's almost endless.
mhm,
And then all of those things, and then and then we show up in front of another human being, and then at its best we bare our souls, but like, whoa, that's a lot of things to bear, and it viscerally feels scary and uncomfortable or inappropriate in a lot of times. And like, I'm pointing, you can't necessarily see right now, but I'm like pointing to my chest and my solar plexus and like down in my belly. Like, oh my gosh, that is where we feel so much. And anytime we feel those things, whether it's shame or fear of judgment, it feels so bad. Most of us have automatic triggers in place, like patterns in place, then to not feel that anymore.
Yeah.
So we shut down the conversation, we change the topic, we pour another shot of tequila. I live in San Diego. There's a lot of tequila here.
Yeah.
We blame the other person for bringing the topic up. We turn the topic around. We brush it under the rug and ignore it. I mean, there's so many things we do to not stay present. And because there's so many things that we've learned along the way that make it feel not safe to be vulnerable with another person. And that is literally like, we feel it inside us. It's a very scary feeling. And depending on how, I'm going to say, conservative of an upbringing you had around emotions and or sex topics, some things can just feel deeply inappropriate. And that's like a very deep, like tapping into your worthiness and whether you're a good person or a bad person. Like, it hits us at those deepest, like, fundamental levels of how we view ourselves and how we think others are viewing us. So yeah, you can see, you can just carry two of those things and that just, makes you want to shut down, let alone that most of us carry a whole host of a combination of those things.
Yeah. So I guess, say, for example, a viewer is kind of watching or listening in to this episode and feels like perhaps you might be describing them in that answer that you just gave. What would they be able to do to kind of start to unpack that? Like, where do they even begin? Because I feel like that's such a difficult task.
Yeah. So as a sociologist, I always like to start with having people reflect on what they did learn growing up. And even like, I have some exercise in my book. Each chapter ends with like, you can literally fill it in the book, like it's like a worksheet type things. You can answer the questions. And so, but the type of things is because we don't realize, like, we're taught that like sex and relationships and all of this is just normal and natural, but we are from birth socialized into what is quote unquote normal and natural. And that varies by person to person, family, society. And we learn what's appropriate. We're socialized into what's appropriate and what's not. And often we're socialized into things that are not good for us. They're not healthy for us. They don't make us feel good. They don't help us connect with others well, and to know ourselves well. So the starting point is to do some writing, some journaling on what did I first hear about sex? What did I learn about bodies? What was modeled for me around relationships? What were emotions safe to express in my household? Which ones were and which ones weren't? Who was a role model for me? Did I have any role models? Early experiences around masturbation, early experiences just being exposed to pornography or any sexual material, getting like writing, like, just writing it out, because often people have aha moments just by doing that. Cause they're like, oh my gosh, wait, that totally started when I was 12. And then to realize, to be like, wait, somebody taught that to me, or somebody said that to me, or that was someone else's, I'm going to say, bullshit story that they imposed on me and their belief systems. And now I've looked at myself through that lens for the past 20 years, and that is not serving me. And to realize that we can write new narratives for ourselves, because the ones that were given to us aren't so great. And they aren't making us happy. And to realize, okay, that's someone else's BS. That's societal BS. That's religious BS. Start, creating some new stories for yourself that nurture your soul, and that give you a chance to have a happier future. So, but it all starts with reflecting on, what did I learn and where did I learn it, and what's not serving me anymore.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess once you've kind of, or maybe you're starting to do the work, if you want to be emotionally intimate with your partner, how would you go about doing that?
Yeah. So, I mean, so I've kind of mentioned mindfulness in passing some here. And so, mindfulness at its core is learning to be present in the moment, and noticing what's happening inside of you and what's happening outside of you, and learning to choose to stay present with it, and then ideally not judge it, kind of observe it. I like to throw in also to mindfulness is actually to really be kind to ourselves in the process and kind to others. Like I bring in the compassion piece, because when we are studying what's happening inside us, what we're thinking, what our emotions are, what we're feeling inside our bodies, it doesn't feel good. There's a reason we haven't stayed in those moments before. Yeah. And so learning to do that, it's really important to pat ourselves on the back and to be kind to ourselves in this process, because it can be very uncomfortable. And so I like to use, I've got a little, for our viewing audience, they can see this little model that I have, but I'll explain it to our listening audience. So it's a triangle that I'm holding up, and it's got a big smiley face in the middle, which matters. And at the top of the triangle, it says thoughts. On one side of the bottom triangle, it says emotions, and on the other side, it says bodily sensations. And then there's arrows pointing on all three sides of the triangle, feeding each other. And so this is the primary basic mindfulness tool that I use with my clients, because, so like, for example, say your partner comes up to you, and you have a great relationship, a respectful relationship, you and your partner love each other, and your partner comes up to you and says, hey, yeah, I noticed it's been like 6 months or so since we've had sex. Can we talk about that? And they say it in a very responsible way, and so if you apply this triangle, your first thing might be, the bodily sensation. You might feel like a clenching, like in your gut, or a dropping feeling. And your thought might be like, oh shit, they're totally right. Like, I had no idea it's been that long. And then maybe you feel your heart pounding and you feel some anxiety in your chest area. And then your thought is, well, yeah, but I've been super busy with this project and they know that. And then, and you feel a little guilt. But then you go into like a little anger, and then you could feel it as like a ball, a heavy ball in your chest, and you feel anger, which then feels powerful. So we feel better. And then you lash out at your partner for even bringing it up. So that's move around the three sides of this triangle of our thoughts, our interpretations, the meaning it has to us, the emotions that we're carrying, and then literally, where do you feel that in your body, from your gut to your solar plexus, up to your throat, up to your head, feeling buzzy, you're tensing your muscles. And because what this does, it's called the triangle of awareness. When we could start applying this, it's hard to catch ourselves in the moment, but you could then afterwards, I tell people to hang this triangle up where they brush their teeth at nighttime and then reflect on their day. Oh, was there a time that I was reactive? Was there a time that I shut down emotionally? Was I driving in traffic and started yelling at people? That's a good one. Was there any time that I wasn't in control of my emotions and just reacted without choosing how I want to respond? And then reflecting and be like, oh, okay, what were my emotions? What was my interpretation? What meaning did it have to me? Where did I feel any sensations inside my body? And what we do then is, over time, we can learn to create space and time where there wasn't space and time before. So, because we all get triggered with stuff and we're off to the races with whatever our brain is most efficiently wired to react to something uncomfortable. And a mindfulness practice like this can help us pull apart the pieces of it and unpack it, and then sit with it. And all of a sudden, you're like, oh, wow, I just noticed. So like, for example, in that example, the partner brings that up, and you're like, yeah, it's been 6 months. You're right. And I'm feeling really crappy inside me right now about that. I know that's not your intent, but I'm feeling sort of icky and in my solar plexus. And I have this fear that you're going to leave me or cheat on me. But I'm also realizing that it feels unfair because I've been super busy and you know that. But I also know that it's not fair to you. And this is one of your love languages and how you connect. Like, that's what we can get to the point that we can do that in the moment. But we need to practice it. And it takes a lot of unpacking. I've been practicing this for like 18 years. So like, what I just said is literally something I can do in relationships and dating situations. I mean, less so once I'm on my second glass of wine. However, otherwise, but it's super vulnerable to do. But it's like, you really get to the heart of the matter and talk about the exact topic at hand, not all of this other baggage you've brought to the table. So, and like in this triangle I was showing, in the center, I have a big smiley face because that's the part of being compassionate and kind to ourselves. Because sometimes people will be like, well, I'm studying all this stuff and I feel like shit now. And I'll be like, no, now you need to complete it. And by being like patting yourself on the back, having pride for yourself that you had the courage to do this, that like you just sat for 30 seconds and felt all of these things that maybe you haven't felt in 15 years because it's scary and it's hard and you didn't know you could do something different. It takes a lot of courage. And then or just be kind to yourself, like feel warmth and compassion towards yourself. You're like, yeah, I'm really struggling with this. Let me have a sense of kindness and nurturing towards myself because of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense for sure. And we will dive into that triangle, I guess, in our practice segment. I've got one final question.
Oh, did I jump ahead section?
No. I think I'm glad you brought it up now because that means I have so many questions with regards to it. So that's great.
Okay.
But I guess like one final question is, you mentioned that you bring this or you bring this mindset to like dates. How do you how do you broach the idea of being emotionally intimate early in the relationship?
I do it by practicing what I preach.
Right.
By talking about, tough topics and by saying, or like, like I'm 49, I'm going to turn 50 next March. And that's freaking me out, especially after going through a pandemic and, and just sharing like tough things, but not in a way of just being emotionally honest, but not in a way of like oversharing and burdening somebody with my stuff. Cause like that's sometimes kind of the version we have, especially like on social media and stuff. And then sometimes it can almost like on social media, it could be like performance vulnerability because they are trying to get something from somebody. So you're not trying to get anything from somebody. And it is just like a showing up honestly and being like, oh yeah, this is something I'm struggling with. What's going on with you? Or, and I'll ask questions too, like, well, what do you love most about your work, and what do you struggle the most with? Or somebody's a parent. I'll ask those questions, like, what's been the most best surprise about being a parent? And, like, what's been a struggle that you had no idea? And so, like, I facilitate questions like that. I'm not great at small talk, as you can probably guess.
Yeah.
But I model it also. So but like it's not like being over negative. It's not oversharing. I don't. It's awareness of boundaries. I mean, at least I think because I'm practiced in this. Like, in me, it feels like it's coming from strength. Now, if I'm on a first date with somebody and immediately, and I'm heterosexual, so I'm dating men, and if somebody's not like trustworthy or doesn't feel emotionally safe, or I don't think is worthy of my vulnerability, I won't go there. I'll ask them tons of questions and I might answer some stuff more superficially, but like people do need to be worthy of that in terms of their ability to handle us and who we really are. And that they're able to not react from their own stuff, because sometimes people do that and then they make you feel worse for sharing what you did. So I think for me, it's just real conversations of what it is to be, as we all are, humans trying to be happy and trying to do the best we can in this world and trying to have meaningful connections with other humans and just speaking from that very human place.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'm the same as you, by the way. I can't do small talk either. I just find it's a distraction. It's like, get to the point.
Right. I know. We're like, no, let's dive into the crazy heavy stuff.
Exactly. So I guess moving on to our practice segment, you've already showed us the triangle, which is really cool. What do you feel are kind of 3 good things about this practice?
Yeah, about the triangle. I mean, I think I could approach that in a lot of different ways, but I think I'm going to look at it as, and I've already been sort of saying this in passing, but just to put it in a structured context for listeners. I mean, one, we all have inherited things from our family and carry emotional, relational, sexual baggage and or negative belief systems or fears or insecurities in some way.
Yeah.
And so in one way, using the triangle is like you do that journaling, that exercise I said, like, where did you learn all of this stuff? Have the triangle sitting next to you when you do that. You're like, what is my belief around this? What meaning does it have? Where do I feel this inside of me? Like, where does it live inside of me?
Yeah.
You're going to get a lot of insights into yourself. So in one way, it's a helpful practice in unpacking our childhood and our teen years.
Yeah.
And that is just invaluable. I mean, because I've even done exercises with folks where they realize, like, oh my gosh, at 12 years old, this thing happened. Say I was, sexually abused by an uncle or something like that. And then my mom didn't really believe me and told me not to talk about it. And
Yeah.
so obviously we cannot undo that. But when somebody gets really clear on that and like where it lives in them, I could have them do an exercise. I mean, different clearing exercises, but one where they actually write a letter now to their 12-year-old self and say all the things that was never said to them. Like, I believe you. You didn't deserve that. You didn't do anything wrong. That person was wrong. You're beautiful and amazing. And all of these things. I'm even making up this scenario right now and I can feel chills down my arm
Yeah,
because
I
that
can feel
shit is
that too. I'm like, that would be
powerful. Yeah.
such
It's
an
it's
emotional time as well. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to realize you can actually, in a way, almost go back and travel in time because
Yeah.
all that stuff still lives in you. And now you're giving you the emotional support and the mental support that you didn't get. And I mean, generally, when people do exercise, like they just start sobbing and sobbing. And then, but like something
Mhm.
opens up and they have now new possibilities in their current relationship.
Yeah.
So that's, one thing is to go back in that way and unpack the past. Second is, we all have just relationship communication triggers, and I've already been talking about some of those. And so using the triangle can help us catch ourselves in the moment or after the fact and come back and be like, hey, so you just said, hey, don't forget to take the trash out, and I totally lashed out at you. That was
Yeah.
not an unreasonable thing for you to say. And I realized that I lashed out because it felt, my interpretation is that you were being condescending and controlling. And that's totally what my dad did to me when I was growing up or whatever. And so,
Mhm.
but you get to catch yourself in the moment and now you get to make new choices. And you
Right.
can literally, like I tell folks, like bring the triangle up to the partner and be like, something's going on between us. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to start with the triangle and talk through what I'm feeling and interpreting from my side. I'd love if you
Mhm.
do the same. Because then, like, you got rid of all the BS and you're really getting to the heart of whatever's going on, which is
Yeah.
normally our interpretations and our emotions. Pretty much what's always going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then the other piece is, and then explicitly, and I also mentioned this in passing, is that then you can apply this mindful presence and awareness specifically to sexual situations.
Mhm.
And be, in the bedroom with some, or doesn't have to be the bedroom, could be the car, could be the kitchen, could be
Yep.
anywhere. Um,
Could
my
be a forest
euphemism for
outside your house.
sex.
Yeah.
Yes. But in a sexual encounter, and that's particularly where we're going to notice body image stuff, performance concerns. If anybody is having concerns around, having erections or being able to orgasm, um,
Mhm.
the more we worry about that, the more that anxiety creates a self-fulfilling prophecy of what we're most afraid of.
Yeah.
So practicing mindful presence in the moment, noticing what's going on inside of you, even being able to talk about it with your partner. You can then anchor yourself in your five senses in the moment. That's a really nice mindfulness activity of being like, I feel these sheets. I feel my skin's partner or my partner's skin. I smell their muskiness. I can smell that candle. I see them. Going through all five of your senses, that gets us out of our head and very present in the moment and very
Mhm.
present with the sensations in the moment. And
Mhm.
so that is, just another way of applying mindfulness. But we need to know, oh, what pattern are we getting stuck down? Choose and then choose to make, a different choice in that moment and realize that we can.
Yeah. And I feel like that would make you a lot more present in, I guess, the
Oh,
sex as well, and just make it a much more enjoyable experience. Because
hmm
if you're not,
yeah,
it's so easy to get distracted
it
when
is.
you're kind of being physically intimate with a partner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, to get distracted, to get caught in our heads. Some people will fantasize. Depends on how much, if you've been drinking, smoking pot, whatever. There's all sorts of things that can kind of pull us from the moment. And not that there's not a time and place for all of that. And they can definitely enhance sexual encounters also. But in terms of like, I just keep coming back to that like raw presence, which can be really scary in a sexual encounter. But to be able to stay present with that and then to have the courage to show up in that way with someone else that also then can provide for, really when people use the term lovemaking, like that's like you are present, you are connected, you are attuned, you're moving together, like you're just very present and sensual with each other and connected in that way.
Yeah, for sure.
Not that there's not a time and place for quickies and such. However,
whatever
it's all
floats your boat.
good.
Yeah.
But we are talking about the depth of intimacy here.
Of course.
So.
Yeah, of course. Are there any challenges people might face when trying to be mindful in this way?
Well, yeah, and overall there's, if folks are dealing with some big traumas that they actually haven't worked through with like a psychologist or therapist, mindfulness is like it could trigger you. It could be dangerous if you don't have a support network with you, or if you're just going too fast into topics. You could definitely get overwhelmed and triggered. PTSD topics, experiences, things like that. So I would say, if you're tackling bigger topics, work with a professional first and get some foundation and have processed some of that work and gain some maybe resilience and confidence around that. But otherwise, it's really hard to stay present in the moment and not be constantly distracted. That's what our brains do. They call it the monkey mind, and and our brains just constantly chatter at us. There was a Harvard research study a few years ago, and I think they had like alerts go off on people's phones, and they had to write down what they were thinking of and keep the journals and all. And they found that almost half the time people's minds were wandering throughout their day. My guess it's probably more than that. But what they found is that the more that folks' minds were just sort of wandering on its own, the less happy people were.
Right.
So, that's our brains too. So, mindfulness is a practice where we are literally cultivating our prefrontal cortex and our executive functioning in the front of our brain that helps us make choices around difficult emotions and things that in the past that our brain would have just automatically reacted. And now we get to pause, we get to study that reaction as it's happening or as it's about to happen. And therefore we've created a little distance and we're observing it. And now we can do something different with it. But that is literally like training for a marathon or anything else. It's like a muscle. You need to build up the skill by a little bit every day, taking care of yourself and nurturing yourself in the process.
Yeah.
And then you could even feel like you're great at something, and then all of a sudden you meet somebody new or you're in a new situation and you're like, how the hell did I get triggered by that same thing? Totally thought I was through that. But it had, a different angle to it or a different vibe, or maybe you weren't well rested, or maybe you hadn't eaten in a while and you're hangry. Like all of you're particularly stressed. You're PMSing, you're about to get your period, or you're going through perimenopause. Like all of these things, like, we got a lot of different physical factors to us as humans that impact how well we're able to be mindful and present. So all of it is difficult. There's lots of challenges. And like anything else, you practice it, you gain some skills in it, and then you see the benefits. Like it really pays off in terms of happiness and satisfaction in the long run. Now, from daily battlefield to battlefield, can be incredibly uncomfortable because you're staying present with uncomfortable emotions and thoughts that you've been running from or numbing from or distracting or blaming your way through. And as we all do. And so it's really uncomfortable. So in a way, it can almost feel like it reduces quality of life, it from battle to battle, but like big picture. Because when I work with clients around this, and then, 6 months later, someone will check in, they'll be like, oh my God, I can't believe how easy this is now. Like I literally but it was not. And they're
Yeah.
like, and I feel so empowered around it. And I feel, and my partner understands me better. And so it really works, but you gotta practice it.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. How often should you practice it? I mean, obviously, you mentioned being able to employ it, pretty much in any situation, but
Right.
where do you begin? Like, how
Yeah.
often should you kind of practice?
And to me, mindfulness is an everyday thing, but just choose one thing. And so even, I had
Mm,
mentioned hanging a picture of the triangle up, and folks could draw out their own ones,
mm.
or they could email me. I could send them something.
Don't forget
And
the
hanging
smiley
up where you
face.
brush your, what's that?
Don't forget the smiley face when you draw it
Yes,
up yourself.
exactly. Don't forget the smiley face.
Yeah.
Very big. um, but like so if anytime we are trying to create a new habit, it's helpful if we anchor it to something else that we already do. And
Right.
so and especially like brushing our teeth is something we often stand in one place. It's a physical activity. And so to hang it right there, like on the mirror in front of you, and then reflect for 2 minutes or something on,
Mhm.
yeah, like I said before, when was the time that I shut down, that I avoided a topic, that I was scared to bring something up and didn't, that I lashed out at a coworker,
Mhm.
whatever, something that felt reactive to you,
Yep.
that felt like a pattern. And then just pull apart those pieces. You don't even have to write it down in those moments, but start, like, if you just did that every night for 1 week for 2 minutes, you're already going to start noticing things in your day in some new
Yeah.
ways. You're going to start to make it more salient. So, and then start applying it to interactions with loved ones,
Mm.
or catch yourself like with a coworker that you're like, oh, I'm starting to feel irritated.
Yeah.
Okay, let me take a few deep breaths, and then let me think, like, how am I interpreting this? Why is this irritating me? What emotions am
Right.
I feeling? Where am I feeling that inside me? Can I
Mm.
breathe into this? Can I be kind to myself in the process? I mean, it's
Yeah.
endless where we can use it, but just start in small ways.
Mm.
And then it does for folks that are meditators out there, even if you're using like an app like Headspace or something, just meditating for
Mhm.
5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day. That is training us in focus and presence in the moment.
Right. Yep.
And that's all tied to this. You're developing the same areas of the brain. So,
Mm.
however, you know, we may all know, I certainly do, folks that meditate multiple hours a day, but like in their relationships, they're still kind of assholes. And so, and
Yeah.
I think, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, you need to apply it also. You
Yeah.
don't,
Yeah.
you escape the world. And while that's still hard to have the discipline and practice to sit and meditate for that long, and you are absolutely developing skills, it is way harder to apply with other humans and
Yeah.
moving through the world.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's really putting it in action and showing up with kindness and compassion towards ourselves and towards others.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, just start small. I mean, there's tons of great books out on mindfulness. Like I said, the apps, all of that stuff are really great small ways to start. And then just start building, and you're just going to start finding new places to apply it. You'll be like, oh my gosh, it never even occurred to me. I can practice mindfulness at Thanksgiving dinner with my family, or Christmas dinner or something like that, instead of like flying off the handle or having to drink 4 glasses of wine.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
yeah,
For sure.
yeah,
And I feel like, especially for like people who are really busy, which I feel like most people are,
hmm,
they having kind of a set time every night to do
yeah,
that work can be really
yeah,
helpful if you don't feel like, I mean, I'm assuming at the beginning it's going to take a while for you to like analyze yourself in that way. So if you don't have that
for sure. And
time,
I mean, just start wherever you are. Like, there's
yeah,
truly no right or wrong. There's no perfect way to do it. Just start where you are. Or spend a few minutes journaling every day at the end of every day on what
yeah,
you reflected on. And if and when you do start using this with others in your life, like, as core to any counselor or therapist or coach will say that, using I statements. I should
mm,
just clarify this, since we're talking about using it in relationships. Don't be like,
yeah,
I feel shame, you made me feel shame.
yeah, yep,
You are
yep, yep.
condescending to me. You'd be like, all of it is, this is my interpretation of this. I'm feeling this is how it's showing up to me. This
Right.
is the meaning
Yeah.
it has for me. And
Mm.
that's hard to separate that out when you're so sure that it's your partner's fault
Yeah.
and they created all of that. But just remember that anyone else standing in anyone else who has different life experiences in that same situation is going to have a different reaction,
Mhm.
because we are all unique in that way and how we've been programmed up to this point. And so knowing it truly is uniquely your interpretation, your experience, your emotions, where they're showing up inside you, and just being responsible with it in that way. So.
How in your experience has this practice impacted relationships?
Gosh.
Kind of a
I
big
was like, gosh,
question,
I
I'm
can think of so
assuming.
many examples. I mean,
Yeah.
so I think about some clients that I work with who have anger problems,
Mm-hmm.
who maybe have kids and they lash out at their kids and then feel really bad about that. Or with their they were raised in a household with a lot of anger, and it's one way they feel powerful. And so, and then they fly off the partner, their handle with their partner, and then their partner not only doesn't feel emotionally safe around them, but also doesn't want to open up sexually to them. So, there's a really great one.
Yeah.
Because they really like anger, you really get to study what's going on inside of you and where you feel it and how you feel building anger and frustration and annoyance, and where you learned that and what it means to you. And so there's just there's a lot to that one that's very visceral, and that is huge when folks practice that. And when they come to their partner and they be like, I'm okay. I need to step away from this conversation right now because I'm going to say something I regret, and you don't deserve that. And so, because I could feel it growing in me, and so I'm going to step away. I'm going to come back in like 10 minutes. Let's pull out the triangle, and I'm going to talk through it. And so, I mean, that's an amazing one. But I mean, folks, when they're able to talk about their deepest fears, their shames, their childhood traumas, and they're able to realize where they're blocking themselves. And then I'll often have them journal on it ahead of time so they can feel all of the discomfort, and as if they're sharing it with somebody, and breathe through it, and then know like, oh, right, I'm not going to die. This feels awful, but I'm not going to die. And so, and being that attuned to our belief systems and our emotions and where we're feeling it inside of us, it takes this really abstract thing that just kind of happens to us. And all of a sudden we can break it apart in these almost tangible aspects, at least like what we're feeling inside of our bodies. And then therefore we could do something different with it. So, I mean, for overcoming sexual shame and embarrassment, mindfulness is so profound, because like the practice of the triangle is learning how to build comfort with discomfort. You've been avoiding this discomfort. Now you're choosing to stay with it. You're breathing through it. You're being kind to yourself. And then that is at the core of emotional resilience, of not pushing something down or blocking from it, but really being with it, and then gaining strength and confidence in ourselves that we can stay present with these uncomfortable sensations. So, I feel like I could just keep going on for examples, but I mean, especially my book is a lot about overcoming sexual shame for women raised like specifically in American society, but there's overlap in a lot of other societies, and applying mindfulness skills. So, so that's a pretty core one to my work, but it applies in so many different ways.
Yeah, for sure. Would you recommend this practice to everyone? You touched on this a little earlier, but would absolutely anyone be able to pick this up right away?
Yes. I'm going to say yes. I mean, I know there's, we talked about if folks have experienced a lot of trauma and haven't had the opportunity to process that yet. So that this may not be the starting point, but this definitely, there's other places they'd be able to use it though, because there's still going to think we're all reactive around certain things that we want to do differently. And so there may not be the heaviest aspects of your life that you can apply this to, but you could in other areas of life, and then start to feel empowered by that, and start to feel proud of yourself and better about yourself. So there's that piece. There is, this thing, where I say, we all have mind chattering at us all the time. That's actually not totally true, because I think there are some people who do not, like, their brains are different. They don't hear like a voice talking to them.
Right.
Most folks do, but not everybody does. And it's just like, there's also folks that can't visualize. So if I was to be like, visualize the triangle, they'd be like, So we do have different capacities. And I think overall mindfulness and meditation is often just taught in one way, but actually our some folks' brains can do some things and some folks can't. And I think it is just almost like a thing from birth. I don't think anything happened. I study these things sometimes because I'm like, I always use these things and like visualize this. And then I learned, I'm like, oh my God, some people can't visualize. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm like, what do you see? What do you feel? What is it? Anyway. So, I mean, so those components but in general, this concept of pausing and reflecting and being kind and realizing we can make new choices. Yeah. I mean, we're humans. Yeah. I think we can all do that. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I do really like the triangle though. I feel like I've never seen mindfulness kind of set out in that way before. It's always been like, be present in your body. And I'm like, I don't know how. I'm like, okay, I can feel my stomach in my body. Sure. Like, but what next?
And now what do I do with that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
well, which is why I like to refer to my work as applied mindfulness, because I think too often mindfulness can feel too separate from the rest of our lives. And since I'm literally applying it to people's sex lives and body image and relationships and communication, that's why I was like, I'm a very practical person. So when I like theories and stuff like that, and that's great. But I was like, okay, how does this directly improve somebody's lives? What is the skill that somebody can literally start putting into action now? Because we do all have busy lives. I mean, would it be amazing if everybody meditated for several times a day and did all these formal practices? That'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Most people will never do that. So, I take a very practical approach of being like, no, there's still really valuable things in meditation and mindfulness that we can absolutely apply and to overcome our shame and stigma and miscommunication and emotional fears. So,
yeah, for sure. I think that's really good, because that's kind of what this podcast is all about. Like, yeah, we have the scientific backing, we have the theory, but how do you apply all of those long words and terms to real life in a way that's actually usable? So, yeah, for sure. In your experience, do you have any other kind of recommendations of a practice or a habit that can be employed alongside mindfulness? I know you mentioned journaling earlier as well, which is pretty interesting.
Let's see. So daily gratitude practices are huge, right? There's we know there's so much around the science of happiness and positive psychology. Just that, and particularly when couples do that, I love that. Like if I have a couple that comes in and they are not communicating and they're struggling with each other, or they're working on something really hard in their relationship, this is like the first exercise that I will give for them to do is and to write down 2 to 3 things from their day that they're grateful for, and make sure one of them has to do with their partner specifically.
Right. Yeah.
And so, and that it could be a strength, something they admire, something they appreciate. And then I always tell them like the power of a gratitude is in like the juiciness of the details of it.
Right.
It's one thing to say, okay, yeah, you looked good today. And it's another thing to say, I know you've been exercising and like that outfit looks fantastic on you. And I love how that like blue complements your eyes. And I just like, you just carried yourself well in that. And I was like, I am so proud that I am your partner and you look amazing. Like that is,
yeah,
like,
that's
that feels
definitely
great.
way better than you looked good today, for sure.
You're like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or, I'm happy how you handled the, our kids, when they wouldn't eat breakfast. And, and then the details could be like, I am so impressed with the patience that you had, and you stayed on it. You stayed on it with little Tommy, and you were kind to him. And then you got creative, and then he took 3 bites, and that was amazing. And I'm so impressed by that. It's the details of what it means to you and what it matters to you, and why you're grateful for it, why you admire it, why you appreciate it, why it brought you joy. That just feels amazing. And some people they have to learn that skill. Like that's, it's tough to learn, but you might struggle with it. It's like learning a new language, but over time you can learn to articulate it in that way. So that's a really great practice. The more couples do that, the more then they just start noticing things during the day that they appreciate, and just randomly sharing those things and doing it with more detail. Another practice that I really love for couples specifically is what I call a melting hug. And it is taking just 1 minute when maybe you haven't seen each other in a while and doing a hug, and where you synchronize your in breath and your out breath together.
Mhm.
And like you were just, there's no phones, there's no distractions. Oftentimes people talk about how their dogs are trying to run between them and all, but or
Yeah.
children are clamoring at them. So as
Yeah.
much as you can for 1 minute, try not to have distractions.
Yeah.
And hug your partner and synchronize your breathing, and you feel yourself melting into each other. And that is like you're counting your breaths, you're present in the moment. Ideally, you're just focusing on that feeling of touching your partner and hugging them. It's a beautiful applied physical mindfulness practice that also is really good for reducing stress. I like to call it, I don't use the word sacred that much, but for me, for couples, it could be like almost a sacred regrouping after they haven't seen each other in a while, of just being like, hey, like we matter,
Yeah.
and we prioritize each other. And this is a really nice way just to like rejoin as a team. So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that does sound really lovely.
yeah.
Well, that kind of ends our practice segment. Sorry, it's called the mindfulness triangle. Am I right? Is that correct? What was the
I
official term again?
I mean, I call it the triangle of awareness.
The triangle of awareness,
It's
right?
Yeah, I adapted it from mindfulness based stress reduction. It's an
Mhm.
8-week class. And apparently they're not using it anymore, because I checked with them for permission, like before I was using it in my book. And then I've adapted it and kind of made it my own.
Mm.
I don't know if they had the smiley face in the center or not. but,
Smiley face
but,
is very important.
yeah, it totally is. I can't remember if they had that or not. But anyway, and they said they're not really using it. They've moved on to like a square or something. I'm not
Okay.
sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So it's yeah. But like I said, or I don't know if you have show notes or something like that. I could even have a handout of it or something that folks could use. Or like
We
I said,
do have
folks
show
can
notes. So
email me.
yeah, it would definitely be
Okay.
helpful to put
So
those
we
in
might
there.
be able to include, that in some way, or folks can just email me and reach out. I'm happy, or they can just draw their own from what they heard on here. So,
For sure.
yeah.
Awesome. So I guess now we move on to our open mic segment.
Okay.
Um, this is where you have the chance to talk about anything you're passionate about, and it could be linked to the topic, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. What did you want to just let loose on?
I wrote down like a list of ideas, because you had, told me ahead of time, and so I wrote down. Let me just read my list, and then
Yeah,
we can
sure.
choose.
Sure, sure.
So the first thing I wrote is generational differences, because I
Mhm,
am obsessed as a sociologist
mhm,
in generational differences between around sex topics, pornography,
mhm.
emotional expression, expectations, communications, all sorts of stuff. So like I'm endlessly sort of comparing millennials to Gen Z
Mhm.
to Gen X, all of it. So there's one topic. Another one I had is just any more about my new podcast of trying to feel sexy again at 48, and the frankly the vulnerability of sharing something just that personal. It's by far the
Mm,
most vulnerable thing I've ever done. It's so
mhm,
personal.
mhm.
My third topic was beach volleyball, because I love beach volleyball. And I live in
Yeah,
San Diego. I play beach volleyball like 3 days a week, and I play like 2-person beach volleyball. So it's like
right.
it's a lot of running around. It's so much
Yeah,
fun. I love the
yeah.
strategy of it. It's just great. And then the last one I wrote is our crisis of vulnerability,
Mm,
which is what I'm calling, and that's some part of the generational thing too. That I do think, because our younger generations, there's some research showing that they were depending, I'm talking in the United States, and certainly more middle class and above folks, were more coddled by their parents and
mhm,
protected, and don't go outside and play, and having very structured lives, um, and then you put that on top of the rates of, and then social media, and basically
mhm.
how it feels like we're constantly comparing ourselves to others, and that like literally you can rate your worthiness or likability by how many people like you and comment
Yeah,
on it, which is insane. There's
yeah, yeah.
zero healthy aspects to that. But then you put on top of it then pornography, and that is for most young folks what they're going to see before they're having sexual activity,
Mhm,
or at least it's going to be early on. And so the expectation of sex is very much as a performance, with
mm,
bodies that need to look perfect. And yeah, you put all those things together and the heightened rates of anxiety and depression we have, I think it's the reason why younger generations are having less sex. Millennials were having less sex before. Gen Z are having less sex. And I think because sex is really vulnerable. And when you could stay home and message people and connect or watch porn and masturbate, I think it's harder to want to be vulnerable and have the skills in doing that with other human beings. So that kind of covered the first topic and the last topic.
Well, I am really interested in that topic because I guess a lot of our audience are millennials, but I'm a younger millennial. I'm on that cusp between millennial and Gen Z. So I feel like I experience the worst of both worlds when it comes to vulnerability and that kind of thing. And that's definitely something that I've noticed is that like Gen Z, very, very open to sex, not having it as much. So they're very
open to the
with
concept of it and tolerance and accepting and open-minded and trying sex toys and stuff like that. But and which is great. Like the fact that there's greater acceptance around all of that and masturbation and toys and pleasure, that's fantastic. But fundamentally as humans, like everything we've talked about tonight is about intimacy and this depth of what really is like, you know, on their deathbeds, people don't regret that they didn't make more money or that they didn't work harder. They regret, one of the biggest regrets is that they didn't have the courage to be vulnerable and authentic and prioritize the relationships that really matter. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about emotional intimacy there. You know, that is fundamentally what most fulfills us as humans and what has the most meaning at the end of people's lives. And to realize, as younger generations, that's scarier and it's harder and and that's a resilience thing. You know, we need to be exposed to tough things, not things that cause like trauma and PTSD, but just difficulty and failure and struggling and even being picked on. Now, bullying's a different thing because that's chronic, but even being picked on, and then how do you work through that and how do you talk to it? And I think just because of social media and phones and parenting styles, parents swoop in and take care of a lot of stuff. And then like in my generation, like we had to figure that shit out. And again, like I'm not saying bullying, like I'm definitely not, but otherwise, like we were always playing together with the neighborhood kids and random stuff, and somebody's unhappy. We got to figure out how to make them happy and make them feel included because we need them for the basketball game. You know, like it's all these skills that are really applicable to being able to be comfortable with discomfort and staying present with it and then connecting with others in that way. So, so I call it a crisis of vulnerability, which is funny because if you look at social media, you'd literally think it's the opposite, but it's still often performance. There's a lot of performance aspects to it. So, not all of it, of course, there's some great stuff out there, but it's interesting.
Tell me more about,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'm so interested. Tell me more about like millennials and how they deal with vulnerability, because in my experience, all millennials are just very anxious because they don't know what's going to happen to them in the future.
Right. Well, so millennials, at least in my understanding of it, and this is probably because of the internet, millennials is the first generation that was really just getting blamed for being different. And right. Which is, it's bullshit. But like every generation's different. Every generation is different in some really meaningful ways than the previous, you know, particularly two above them. But we are, because of the internet and because of social media now and technology, our cultural changes and our generational differences, I think, are getting more and more extreme. Like literally wiring our brains differently, depending on how you're raised. So what do I think about millennials and vulnerability? What do I think about? Because I'm a Gen Xer. Well, Gen Xers and above aren't particularly good with vulnerability. So because that was not taught. Probably millennials maybe are better with it, frankly. But I do think they carried an unfair weight of being blamed for all sorts of stuff. And then they started blaming boomers and everyone else for stuff. Like everybody, I was like, people, this is how it always is. I'm like,
I feel like I'm getting to that point where I'm like, oh, kids these days.
I know. That's so funny if you're saying it. That's awesome. No, but I think because the differences are so drastic. And because of you know, what you're watching on TikTok or Instagram. Like, and it's like, it's changing the generational zeitgeist at a much faster pace. It's kind of crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And in some ways it's great because there's a lot of much greater social awareness. We were talking about the tolerance, environmental awareness. However, there's only one way to get wisdom, and that is time and experience.
Yeah, for sure.
And what we need is, you know, what's always missing is sort of this mix of youthful awareness and thinking outside the box and passion. But I wish we could have that in the brain of a 50-year-old who's got a lot of life experience and wisdom and realize what works and what doesn't, and why, yeah, your idea is great and we've tried that a bunch of times and here's why it doesn't work. And it's not that we're not listening to you, and it's not that we've never tried it.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting about millennials and vulnerability. I'd say they may be in the middle. Probably not a bad place. Maybe they're the best at it.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, Dr. Jenn, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
Where can people find you?
Yeah, my main hub for everything is my main website, which is drjensden.com. Actually, all folks have to do is go to Google and type in any version of however they want to spell Dr. Jen's Den, and you'll find me. Yeah. So my main website, which then has my 2 TEDx talks. I have a powerful consent violation story and experience, and that I had, and how I handled that, and how I made sense of it and analyzed it. I've got my 2 podcasts, my new one there. My book is on there. My links to all, you know, if folks like me and my approach, please find me on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. Probably Instagram is the one that mostly folks will follow me on and I'll engage with. Got tons of YouTube videos out there. Like, there's a lot out there, but please, if you like my stuff, please follow, please share, so we can have more conversations like this.
For sure. I'm sure a lot of people will be rushing to look you up now as soon as the episode is over. But yeah, thank you again so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. The questions were great, and this was really, as you can tell from my passion and animation, I really enjoyed this. So thank you.
I'm so glad. You've been listening to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. For more episodes like this from 10 different life management perspectives, search LMSL on YouTube, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts, so you can get updated on everything we have to offer. We have a wide range of topics readily available for you to check out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found at re.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Aditi Kutty. Thanks for tuning in.